We want to bring in Gloria Browne-Marshall, Associate Professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice at City University in New York. Gloria, thank you very much for talking to us about this. Let's flesh out this settlement. It came about 6 months after her death, and I, for one, was surprised at the timeline, but also how open they were about discussing the details of the settlement. Is this a typical timeline for a settlement?
No, it's not. Usually the settlement comes after the criminal charges. And so I think it's very important for us to understand that criminal charges must take place. Criminal justice is there to send a message to officers, to anyone who takes a life in this manner. And as long as the settlement is coming out of civilian taxpayers' money, meaning Breonna's paycheck, and that of her parents and any of her loved ones go into the tax coffers. That money is money that is being paid out to the family in this settlement, taxpayer money. There has been nothing of criminal implication or criminal consequence to these officers, and these murders will still keep going on as long as they're done with prosecutors who fail to prosecute.
It's a good point that you make about the settlement money and where it actually is coming from. The settlement was reached, as you point out, before any criminal charges were brought towards the officers involved. How does that work as the family continues to press for charges? Does this settlement at all muddy the waters for criminal charges?
It certainly does, but these are two different legal entities. So the prosecutor's office is only going to focus on the criminal charges. The Attorney General's office is the top prosecutor. And so we're waiting for that top prosecutor to bring those charges. At the same time, there are civilian or civil side attorneys who work on these other issues like a settlement. I think the pressure of the protesters, and that's why protesting and litigation and legislation are all necessary. These protesters pushed for this criminal action to even go as fast as it has. In the Michael Brown case and other cases, it took even longer. So I think that if the protesters keep up their pressing urgency on this matter, that despite muddling the waters, there will be some form of criminal charges.
So we have a civil settlement before the criminal case. $12 million, one of the largest single payouts for a police shooting. The attorney for the family says it is the largest for the killing of an African-American woman. I'm wondering whether or not you think this is signaling a permanent change moving forward. Is this precedent setting?
It will be precedent setting when the criminal charges are brought. And then we have to look at the issue of the standard in a criminal case. A standard of reasonable force is what the Supreme Court has set out when the deadly force is used by a police officer. If these officers, like so many in Amadou Diallo's case and Philando Castile and Tamir Rice have walked, then we are back where we started from, with taxpayers paying out this money and not having any criminal consequences and the measures that are necessary to keep another life lost. I am sure that Breonna Taylor would prefer her daughter alive and well than the $12 million. I think the last point of this is it was the no-knock rule that led to a death in New York City that prohibited no-knock rules. And what I'm concerned about is that when we start talking about changes, why must they come after the death of an African American? Why is that the needed change after a murder that we have that signal that things have gone too far? I'm concerned about what's necessary to make changes in criminal justice, especially without the prosecutor actually coming forward and saying, we're going to prosecute, and the standard for prosecution, reasonable force, is going to be met in this case. And if not in this case, then when are we going to ever meet the standard of reasonable force when it comes to an African-American male or female?
Professor, we had Michelle Jacobs on our air earlier this year talking about how Black women who are killed at the hands of police don't gain the national attention as Black men. You recently wrote a book, She Took Justice, The Black Woman, Law and Power, 1619 to 1969. From your perspective and your research, why is there a lack of outrage when Black women are killed at the hands of police?
I think that even if you go back to lynching, There were many Black women and girls who were lynched, but you don't hear about their cases. I think it's this sense of women generally don't receive the same amount of attention that men receive. And also, it's the Black woman who holds up these protests. That many times it's the Black woman who has stood fast behind the Black men as well as behind her own issues. I'm concerned when it's the Black woman not receiving the national attention. In the Taisha Miller case back in California, there was another Black woman who was killed by police. I think that Black women are going to have to stand up for themselves more often, and also get our Black men and other men of color and other men generally to understand that women's lives matter. And the Me Too movement was a part of that, and we need to extend it when it comes to criminal justice as well.
There are a lot of policy changes addressing the settlement as well. Incentives for officers to live in Louisville, which I was shocked didn't occur already. Encouraging officers to volunteer with a community organization, implementing warning systems to track all the use of force incidents, which is something else I was shocked didn't already occur in Louisville. But as I'm reading all of this, I start to wonder, can policy changes also change culture? I want to get your take on this. Is this the beginning of the conversation? Can these policies actually lead to permanent changes? Changes not just that, officers feel obliged to follow, but they acknowledge as part of the job, not just something that they have to do because of the policies.
I give this example. We all stop at red lights. If there was no ticket given for stopping at a red light, how many people would do it? Some people may do so because out of concern for their fellow man or woman or child. Others would speed right through. Without criminal consequences, there are very few things that people would say, oh, out of the kindness of my heart, I will not take a life. I'm concerned in any other aspect of American life where criminal consequences are necessary to send a message that lives matter. Policy changes come, as I said, at the expense of a life, and usually a Black life, male or female. There are people who believe that Black people don't have souls. And I hate to say this in 2020, there are people who believe that a Black life does not matter, that they can literally get away with murder because they've been getting away with murder for so long. Some places, their shooting range has a Black face on the target. There is a culture of killing Black people that goes back 400 years, and we just talked about that. We talked about the Black Lives Matter part of 1619 and the 400 years of commemorating Black people being here since the arrival in Virginia. We have never addressed the criminal justice system. Every other system in this country has had reform. The voting rights system has reform. We've had reformed in housing. We've had reformed in employment. We've not had any reforms in criminal justice. And so the culture you talked about before is a culture of protecting whites from people of color. And so that culture is so embedded in this nation, it's going to take more than the policy changes. That's a good conversational start. But it's also going to take these same prosecutors who know very well how to prosecute a civilian in a civilian on a civilian murder. They have to start prosecuting these police officers in much the same way. And the standard has to be one in which they can reasonably say, if I feared for my life, how did you fear for your life? But without charges being pressed against these officers and having a trial in which they actually have to say how they feared this Black person, then we're going to continue to have these types of murders taking place and these long and confusing episodes that we see in the Breonna Taylor case.
All right,
Gloria,
thank you
very
as
much.
always.